Biddy Mason was born enslaved in Hancock, Georgia in 1818. Her owner, Robert Smith, later moved to Mississippi, where he became acquainted with the Mormon religion. The mid-1800s were a tumultuous time in American politics, and 1850 was an important year in many ways. Unbeknownst to Biddy Mason, decisions being made about California and Utah were about to have a significant impact on her life. In Congress, the Compromise of 1850 allowed California to be admitted into the Union as a free state. It also amended the Fugitive Slave Act, and it amended the sale of slaves in Washington, D.C., and created the territorial governments of New Mexico and Utah. The new territory in Utah was not a state, but it was assigned to a governor to oversee its administrative duties. Brigham Young, the leader of the Latter-day Saints Mormon Church, was appointed as the first governor of the territory of Utah. This decision made many people who had converted to the Mormon faith move to Utah to be closer to their leader and to the establishment of this new territory. Robert Smith had already converted to Mormonism, and sometime before all of this happened, he moved himself and the people he owned to the territory of Utah. It was a 2,000-mile journey from Mississippi to Utah, and of course it had to be done by wagon, by horseback, and by foot. Biddy Mason was forced to go on this trip with Robert Smith, and she had several duties to perform along the way. Biddy Mason also had daughters, one 11 years old, one 4 years old, and one under a year old. In addition to taking care of her daughters, Biddy also had to herd the cattle throughout this long journey. She had to prepare meals, and she performed midwife duties. Once they arrived in Utah, Robert Smith settled there for several years. He then decided to go to California to join a Mormon settlement in San Bernardino County. This was another 600-mile journey during which Biddy walked behind a train of wagons while again herding cattle. Once in California, Biddy Mason and some of the other enslaved people that Robert Smith brought with him befriended members of the free black community there. Robert Smith remained in California for 4 years, but when he decided that he no longer wanted to live in California and that he wanted to move to Texas, free African Americans came to the aid of Biddy Mason and the others. Robert Smith was stopped by the sheriff of Los Angeles when he was on his way out of town, and he was served with a writ of habeas corpus. The matter was reviewed in the U.S. District Court of the County of Los Angeles, and the judge determined that the said persons of color are entitled to their freedom and are free and cannot be held in slavery or involuntary servitude, given that California was a free state. Thus, on January 19, 1856, Biddy Mason, her 3 daughters, Ellen, Anne, and Harriet, and 10 other people who were enslaved by Robert Smith were freed. Biddy Mason got a job as a midwife and a nurse, and she began to save up her money. She eventually purchased property at 331 South Spring Street in what is now downtown Los Angeles. She was a smart woman and purchased additional properties, which grew in value as the city of Los Angeles grew. For instance, she purchased and then reportedly sold one of her properties, a 40-foot lot, for some $12,000, which was a considerable sum, as you can imagine, at that time. She amassed a great amount of wealth, and her children and her grandchildren also shared in her wisdom, as they too managed the real estate that she gave them and sold their land for profits. Biddy Mason became a well-known philanthropist. During a flood in the early 1880s, many people in the area lost their homes. Biddy contracted with a local grocery store owner and bought food for a good deal of the families who were made homeless by the flood. She also visited prisons and became known as Grandma Mason in the community. She helped to start the oldest African-American church in Los Angeles, the First African Methodist Episcopal Church, in 1872. The church is still in existence today and has over 19,000 members. Grandma Mason also operated one of the city's first daycare centers, and she opened her home to new settlers who were in need of help as they came to the city of Los Angeles. Today, the location of her original home is an historic site in Los Angeles. Biddy Mason was a true American pioneer.